So some reflection and even comments from the floor.
Thank you, Laura. Good morning, everybody, and good morning to the about 66 people online. Very glad that you could all make it today. I just wanted to give an introduction on the shared approach and the rules of engagement for evidence-based decision-making work that we do as a collaboration between data providers and data users. The purpose of this collaboration is to ensure that we all support our purpose, which is really collecting and using the right data for decision-making in humanitarian response. And this is something that we started working on a few years ago, more or less 7, under the Grand Bargain working group co-led by DTM and REACH, that was bringing together all the partners and all the actors that you see there. So UN agencies, clusters, 3 donors, or more than 3 donors actually, NGOs and initiatives and other organizations. And many of us also in the room and online were part of this work. Out of this work, we had a few agreements on what is that we need to do in order to have useful and usable data. And more, we are also looking at, from a data responsibility point of view, ethical and safe data management. So useful, usable, effective, safe, and ethical data and data management. I'm going to go through these few basic principles, foundations of our cooperation and our work. But if you do have questions, then do let us know. This is my favorite one. We start from decisions and not from questions. And this comes from my own personal experience, in which I've always done the opposite. So in all the years of my field work, I started writing questionnaires because it's the most fun thing to do. However, it's probably not going to be the best thing to do if we want to really identify what we need to know in order to do and to make our decisions for a humanitarian response. So we have agreed among all of the people and the partners that you saw before that we do really need to start from the use. And a way of imagining or conceptualizing the use is what is the decision that I have to do about my response that I cannot make at this point, and therefore I need some data to make. At that point, you identify the information that you need, you look at the information you already have that are available, and then you identify your information gaps. Only at that point, we go and develop questionnaires, which is what I started doing. Methodology first, of course, which methodology we're going to use for our data collection. And then we are going to develop questionnaires, but also data analysis plans. And we've heard also yesterday in a few sessions about data analysis plans and how relevant they are to keep that link between the data we collect and the final use and the analysis we're going to do with them. I use this example, which is a GBV example, and it's just to give you an idea of what we mean, but then we'll have GBV people and colleagues talk about really the information that they need and the analysis framework. An example of a decision for humanitarian response is, where should I establish my services? So how do I make that decision? What information do I need in order to make that decision? For example, again, it's just an example, in which location the GBV risk is higher and in which locations we don't have enough services for GBV survivors. For each one of these information needs, we have different methodology to collect that information, and also our question in the questionnaires will change depending on which methodology we use. We'll hear a bit more about this during today's session, also from our colleague Joe, when he will talk about things that we can and cannot do with key informant interviews and household level interviews. So the other big foundation of our work is that we really need to use all the data that are available, that are appropriate, of course, but that are available to build what we sometimes call the data house, to build that picture and understand where we're working, what is the need, what do we need to do in terms of programming and advocacy. And the data house includes DTM data, it includes MSNA data, it includes CODs, Common Operational Data Sets. It includes information from qualitative data, from data collection, focus group discussions, expert interviews, and so on. And the other big agreement that we have, and I think now quite spread around the humanitarian sector and the humanitarian data sector, is that we cannot do this in isolation. The data people, the providers of data cannot know what the users of data need in order to make that decision. So we need to work together, respecting our skill sets and respecting our added value in this cooperation. A cooperation that is a shared responsibility. It takes two to tango. It takes four at least for this cooperation to be effective. We need to have the data providers. We need to have the subject matter experts. We cannot collect data on GBV or for GBV without the GBV colleagues or child protection colleagues. We need to know what decision needs to be made, and that's really the decision makers partner that needs to help us with that. And then we need to understand the context where we're working, because we're not working in the same context all the time, and what works in one country or in one region does not work in another country, in another region. The contextual experts are really fundamental also to help us go through a do no harm analysis before and during our activities of data collection and data management. I think you're going to see how we do this in practice throughout our presentation today. And first and foremost with Francesco Michele, that is going to go next from the GPC, the Global Protection Cluster, and then with our other panelists. Thank you.
Thank you, Daunia. And thank you, everybody, for participating in this session, which I'm very excited about. So we have been collaborating endlessly for the last several months, so it's good to show this collaboration to all of you. I will be very quick in some concepts, but it's just to put a bit of flavor of also the presentation of the colleagues. Now we are actually concretely bringing about a bit more collaboration and be better in protection analysis. I just put on the slide very challenges that we know of protection. So it's nothing new, but it was our starting point. I mean, there is the first one is something that it might sound naive, but it's always something I like to say. Protection is complex. We can't say that it's not complex. It is complex. But if we collaboratively work together, we can. It's not complicated. I mean, we have to put the right step, the right collaborative approaches, and we can get a good sense of protection situation in countries. The second challenge, which is a recognition that we have to do, there is no single primary data collection exercise that can help us out in understanding protection. Also, that's a fact. I mean, I like to, maybe I'm too strong, but it's a fact. So there's also a recognition that we have to none of us, protection or area of responsibility or actors, can have an understanding of protection in isolation with just primary data. That's impossible. But then raises a couple of challenging questions. How do we create a condition for reliable value judgment? And I like to speak about reliable value judgment. Value judgment is fundamental, but how we can make it reliable. And then the second is we have to be collaborative. We need all the actors involved in this value judgment. But how do we harness the capacity, the presence, the frameworks that we're going to see that everybody has? That's the complex part. It's not complicated, but it's the complex. So what are we trying to do? When we speak about we, is set of the Global Protection Cluster, all the area of responsibility, the colleagues of REACH, the colleagues of DTM, but also we're reaching out with other data providers and many other partners on protection monitoring specifically, and all with many protection partners. What we're trying to look at since a while now is, one is recognition again that we need bottom-up approaches, because sometimes we tend to do data collection analysis and putting everything together in operation at capital level, where we have the central offices. But we have difficulties in going subnational. So there's a fundamental part. To understand really the context and really understand protection, you have to be closer to the area. I know that it sounds simple, something that we all know about it, but we have mechanisms on the level of data and analysis that we can put in place to do that. The second is, how do we strengthen the importance of use value judgment and observation by partners? I mean, many of you, when we go in operation, the best protection analysis is the people that is actually going to the field. And then you speak with them and they tell you what they see, and that's a good protection analysis. But from the data perspective, that is information we don't use. We rarely use it because we use data collection, we use questionnaires. But so how do we use that better? And then overcoming the challenges that it's a sector-wide, but I think that it's common not just to protection to everybody, not having quantifiable data. So the the tyranny of the quantifiable data. So how we can go beyond that. And what we're trying to do is to see how to increase consultation and then try to build on all different frameworks that we're going to see today to have a common, and probably common framework is not the right wording, but it's a common approach to the use of the different frameworks. So there are four major, these are processes that we are doing since many months now, and they are continuing. So it's a way to present it to them, but also to gather more actors, partners that would like to join up, because the more the better. The first one is increasing, of course, reflections. Reflection is it seems simple, but it's not coordination. We are really sitting down together, as you will see, in several months, in really discussing every single nuances together, which is a big, an important process. We are working on clarifying the process of analysis. A framework itself doesn't explain how to do analysis, specifically when multiple partners are involved. We have to think of a process, and the process cannot be theoretical. It has to be contextual and to be analytic. Then, as a protection sector, we are trying to work much more clearly on clarifying what is a protection risk and what is a protection need. I think we all recognize the protection risks it's what we have to look for, is what we have to understand analytically. But considering that the majority of the information the analysis we use is for humanitarian needs overview or for humanitarian purposes, we tend to use risks and then to respond to need, and there is a bit of clarification to be done on that. And then the last exercise is what Daunia pointed to, is the work on harmonization. So we'll be very quickly, this is a set of steps on the first element, how we're increasing the reflection. After the path 3 years ago, we've been having more than 2-3 years of lessons learned, learning on protection analysis and so on, and we realized 3 major things. That to understand better protection risk, we had to have common definition. Not perfect definition, but at least common as a starting point to reflect about that. Then we had to have criteria, because if we want to increase value judgment, we have to understand what do we mean when we assess and monitor a severity or how strong is the risk impacting the population. Once we've been doing that, now we are in the moment where we can homogenize data and information. So that's the reason that we've just started. That homogenizing data has been a process that started also in the past, but now we are doing much more strongly with the colleagues of DTM, colleagues of REACH, all the other responsibility and other partners, because we did the step before. So now we started with a framework. We start understanding how to use it in analysis. We start looking at the definition that helps us out in understanding what do we mean. And we start looking at criteria that it helps us out in understanding how do we want to assess risk. Now we can sit down and homogenize it. So the starting point, again, is not what question do we put, what question do we use, but as you can see is, okay, what are all the set of strategic planning, programming decisions we have to do? And that is why now we are a bit more ready. This is a very simple graph. I will be very quick on this, of something that is in draft now. But one of the things that has always been one of the questions, at the level of the sector, we have the protection analytical framework, which is the endorsed framework for protection analysis. But on GBV, we have a strong analytic framework. In child protection, we have a strong analytical framework. So how do they link together? The answer, I will be very simple. They don't link. The beauty of a framework is that helps us out in deepening the understanding on that specific analysis. So the child protection, the NIAF, is the best framework to understand child protection risks. The GBV framework is the best to understand GBV protection risks. When we bring them together, is where the path is useful, because it helps us out in understanding how this deepened analysis can help us out in understanding the overall picture. That's what the graph says, very simply. So what we are doing now is on the last blue, we want to look at how to do convergence of that. How we can put the data that is available, how to basically chase for data to value judgment. And that's where harmonization, actually, that's the wrong word. Harmonization of the use of data information against risks and against a common approach is absolutely useful. Let me go a bit quicker. So on the clarity of the process, this is a simple graph that I'm just showing very quickly considering the timing. But as you can see, we have been clarifying at our level that our analysis focuses on risks. And that is what we use as a starting point then to use different subset of that analysis for programming decisions. There you can see on the bottom right what can be used for specific needs overview, which is a subset of our risk analysis. So this just to, as you can imagine, this seems simple, but that took us 2 years to figure out a possible process of analysis. And this is not the perfect one. This is a draft. We're going to look together. We're going to test it. And we're going to. But clarifying how do you do the process together collaboratively, it's what can help us out making more strive in using efficiently available information and data. The third thing, as we were saying, I will go very quickly, which we are working on clarifying the difference between risks and needs from an analytical perspective, not from a theoretical perspective. The general bottom line of our approach now is, as you can see on the left, on the right side is something that we're working on draft. Protection risks help us out in having a clear situation on how violence, coercion, delivery deprivation, and other type of violation affect a context. That situation, which is probably the most common across many of the country because of the complexity, results in two very broad categories. Situation that can be mitigated by humanitarian action, and situation that require more structural and non-humanitarian action. So this is our starting point for the harmonization of data and information. So that also helps us out in clarifying what information we need for what. On the risk side, very simply, why this is important? Because these are two risk analyses of the same country, South Sudan, on two different risks, attacks and child and enforcement separation. From a very simple perspective, where we have two areas with highest level of severity of different risks, that's very helpful to know, to understand the interrelation, to understand drivers, to actually sit down with the right partner to understand what's happening. But also, when you have a situation where you have, maybe let's imagine that attacks is the most common risk considered by the humanitarian coordinators. So, but you have one area that is not actually considered high, but we have other risks. So this helps us out in actually pinpointing a situation that we actually have to have a careful look at. On the needs side, I will be very quick. It's my 10 minutes. So I will be very quick. We have been working on clarifying dimension of needs, the results for those risks. And now we are looking together with all the area of responsibility as a partner in understanding what those mean in terms of information and data. And closing, this is the exercise that is the most important, is the harmonization. Very simply, we are looking not just at our own internal tools, so the protection monitoring and others, we are looking at REACH data sets, DTM data sets, GBV, Child Protection, Mine Action, all the data sets available from the collective. And what we're trying to do is to harmonize them against risks. So we have 15 categories that we monitor, harmonize them against the protection analytical framework overall, so we can understand if an information can help us out, not just to understand the risk, but to understand maybe what is causing the risk, the effects, and the consequences. And also the same information need, how it can be used to then understand the subset of needs. So it's a multiple layer of harmonization of data. And here, this just open for our next colleague. What is the message here? So we want to understand not anymore what question do we put in a question. We want to understand what is the minimum we need to actually have a picture of a situation of a risk, and what is the ideal set of information we need. So we cannot start from the ideal and we cannot have the minimum. But these two elements help us out in actually sitting down with different partners and understand where that information lies. Because sometimes we jump on the questionnaire without knowing that information is already there. So, and then the second thing, this is going to help us out in understanding better the data collection we need. There are questions in protection that cannot be done through specific method. We cannot ask direct questions on GBV specific things or other area. And we have to recognize that, but that doesn't mean that we can use other approaches. The complexity of it, coming back to my first message, is that if we don't have a framework and a logic that guides us, it's extremely complex to understand what method to apply where. So that's the reason we're doing this exercise, to try to help us out in making that complex cloud in a less complicated system, at least for us to start it from. It's not going to be perfect, but it's a starting point then to learn from it. And then lastly, but this is probably the starting of this panel, this is going to help us out in using much better and much more rationally the sources that we have. And I conclude there, one of the conversations we were doing at the beginning, sometimes in the field, we fight over questions in questions. I need this question, I need this other question. No, you cannot put that question. We want to shift conversation and be, okay, this is the information we need to know to understand protection. We all have been agreeing on that. And then we look, okay, in DTM, for instance, what are the information available? 1, 2, and 3. With that 1, 2, and 3, it's useful for this, but it's not useful for this. So then it's a rational conversation to do, actually, to identify other partners that can help us out in understanding better the protection situation. I stop there, and I'm sorry to take
Thank you.
1
It
minute.
was amazing. Move on to some highlights of different methodologies.
So I just want to have a bit of a reflection on a common circumstance, which is we've talked about the need to start with decisions and with the information needs and methodologies. Often the point where protection actors are going to be asked to input on something is when there is already a big data collection method planned, the methodology has been set, and you're asked to provide what questions you think are priority for it. And this ends up in the challenge that Francesco has highlighted, that then we end up with a load of questions which don't really suit the methodology. I'm going to draw on 2 particular assessments for this. The first is the DTM multi-sectoral location assessment. This is a key informant-led assessment. It's carried out usually once or twice a year in a number of countries around the world. It looks at an individual site and gets information on that site. The other assessment is the multi-sector needs assessment, which is usually the country-wide assessment, which is used to feed into the HNO, the JF, all of this. That is conducted by a number of different actors, but probably most commonly REACH, and DTM does do them as well. I want to start by asking people to shout out at me what you think the problem is with each of these questions. These are all challenging questions. They're all things which have either been included or suggested for multi-sector location assessments or MSNAs. So they're all real world. But I just want to know, I should say that some of these are challenges that are not insurmountable. So it's not necessarily that they're completely non-redeemable. So we'll start with the children that have been separated from their normal caregivers. What extent was this separation planned? Asked to a key informant. Can someone suggest a problem with this? Well, someone be brave. Sorry, can you repeat that?
What's a normal caregiver?
Yep. So there's a problem with definitions here. And the reason that definition has been set like that is it's quite complicated to explain the concept QASC to someone who's not a specialist. The other problem with this is, how does the key informant know the level of planning of an individual? How safe do women feel at food distributions?
Often asked to a man, King.
Just to add to the complexity.
There is no way that any key informant, male or female, is really going to be able to tell you about the feelings of other people. Certainly if they're not a member of that community, and yes, certainly if they aren't there. Can IDPs in need of protection services access those services?
What are those services?
This falls into an area of jargon, right? We know what protection services are, but a normal person doesn't necessarily know that. The other issue is, if somebody is accessing a GBV service, I do not want their community leader to know that they have done so. They shouldn't know this information, let alone can't. And the household size. Does your household face discrimination in accessing services in this location?
Each one, the household, it's not individual, is it? So some people in the household could, others might not.
It could differentiate between members of the household. Think about this. This is an MSNA conducted in Sudan 2 years ago. What do you notice about this?
Where are the households?
So the gentleman sat in the green chair is the person being interviewed.
Be the head of household.
He's, I believe, a household head.
Yeah.
It's open air. Now in this, the shot, I picked a picture that didn't have hundreds of children in it because I didn't want to show faces without explicit consent. A lot of the interviews are not conducted in private. And if you are asking questions about discrimination, experiences of that nature, you have to remember that somebody might be listening.
I think it also depends upon the context. So
It does
like,
depend
for
on the
example,
context.
in the crowded IDP, so it's really hard to find the wide space or some space to do an interview.
Exactly. But we don't always have a space available.
Yeah.
any household member has died in the last 3 months, what was the cause of death? And this leads into an old JF 1.1 indicator, which was about number of people, number of deaths associated with conflict.
What the person thinks the cause of death might not be the actual cause of death.
Specialist knowledge.
It is retrospective mortality data.
Also remember, enumerators are young, inexperienced. We may be going to areas where there aren't a great deal of services. What kind of duty of care do we have to those enumerators and to the respondents about triggering traumatic disclosure? This is my all-time favorite. Are women and girls in this household at risk of gender-based violence? What do you do if they say yes? And then this one, this is an indicator, but I wanted to draw on this because this happens quite a lot as well. Percentage of households by access to clean water source disaggregated by male, female, and childhood households.
Be specific.
Any major issues here?
Yes.
The problem here is in a household assessment, a sampled survey is a very small subset, which will have a very small number of interviews conducted, even in a large scale assessment. We are very unlikely to have a large number of child-headed households included in our sample. It's not because we're avoiding them, it's just because that's how it happens in a sample set. Some of these challenges, the first is around the scope of knowledge. KIs generally are going to be non-specialized, so they can only give you non-specialized information on the community. Households can give you information about that household. They can't extend beyond the household very easily. And in some cases, they can't tell you about the experiences of individual members within that household with reliability. Think, and connected to that, about the bias. So for example, how a male respondent will report the experiences of women and girls. There's limitations within sample assessments. You can't use it for case identification, which thankfully we seem to have moved away from trying to do. And that we have limited data on small subsets within the population. Think about the risk of harm, so triggering disclosures without referrals and support services. And then how you may cause reactions, threaten the safety of either the enumerators or the respondents. And then think about the environment and the specialization of the enumerators. Enumerators are not protection specialists, and we could never get them to be protection specialists. And also the interviews are often not conducted in private. Just wanted to have some reflections on how I think we got here. I think there's an understanding as we move towards more and more talk about evidence-based decisions, we carried over some false assumptions about evidence. And the first of those was that in all cases, you must know the scale of a problem in order to plan a response. And particularly in protection, that is not true. You don't need to know the scale of GBV to plan a GBV response. And also this prejudice that good data for decisions is always quantitative. As somebody who specializes in quantitative data collection, I probably should not be saying this, but stop giving us money to do things that we are not suited to do in quantitative data collection. The second issue is that time, expertise, and money to plan dedicated assessments are quite scarce and hard to come by. People are scared of assessment fatigue, they're scared of duplication of efforts, they're scared of planning something that is going to take a lot of time and money. And that's led to a situation where I think we have a slight over-reliance on a small number of generalized multi-sectoral assessments. So we're too reliant on MSNAs, we're too reliant on the MSLAs for all of our information needs. And connected to that is then what I would describe as the golden bullet assessment problem. Is if you have no information, if you believe that you need that information in order to plan your response, then you want to believe that Reach's MSNA or DTM's MSLA is going to give you what you need. And we often, in the past, I speak having worked for both organizations, have fed into that problem. We sell something as a great idea, as something that is going to deliver protection and wash and shelter and everyone. And we have to be realistic about what can be done with the methodology we have. In terms of what can be done, I'm really just going to be very brief in touching on what has already been said and is about to be said. First is follow that process. Think about the evidence that you need for decisions, the information, the methodology, and feed that in when you're asked to input on questionnaires. That means focusing on indicators that match the method of data collection. So those that are specialized for key informants should be key informant. Those that are specialized for household should be household. So I'm giving some examples here, but I'm running close to time, so I'll skip through. The other thing, and this is really important, is for protection actors and actors from all sectors to contribute expertise and training to enable the capture of more sensitive indicators. We picked out some household ones here. Some of the household questions, even those that I highlighted in that first slide, are made more possible if our enumerators have proper training and access to referral services and support services. So having a protection person in the room when we're doing enumerator training is invaluable. It's so useful. And then finally, utilize other data sources and methodologies. So look at program data, think about doing proper qualitative studies, the value judgment that Francesco has raised, and then finally improve the ingestion and analysis of available secondary data. And that I'll leave it because I think my colleagues are going to speak specifically about this next on child protection.
Hello, everybody. My name is Jimena Contla, and I'm here I've been working with child protection AOR as a consultant. We had like a little bit of a project that they said, okay, we have all of this data and we want it all in a product because this is what people do right now, right? And it's like, so the purpose of this consultancy was to equip the child protection area responsibility with a centralized system for the collection and analysis of child protection data for humanitarian operations, and to streamline the collection, management, and visualization for better coordination and support. Okay, super big. So what actually happened over here? We went all around and we look into this, that is basically the NIAF, the Needs Identification Analysis Framework that I believe Donia here was the one who was actually doing this framework. So we use this in order to structure all the information that we can have, all the secondary data we can have. And we found around 25-ish data sources with several hundred of indicators, each of them. And we had to reduce all of that to only 15 sources. And we can only display 5 sources. To feed all of this, we have underlying causes, child protection risks, availability of services, consequences. And then within each of those pillars, we have even more things inside. So our challenge was to put a lot of these data like that, in forms of indicators and in forms of scores and severity risks, especially, for example, we're using a lot AHIPS data to do that. But then we find within those things something like this: norms and values, legal framework, and rule of law. And we need to find indicators for this. Where do we find norms and values that can cause harm to protect children in specific groups? Where do we find a database online? Because one of the challenges is that it has to be automatic and it has to be fully autonomous. I have no other people. We have, it's Salim who's there, like also our NLP engineer, and myself, we are doing this by ourselves. We don't have people in the field feeding the process, nothing. So what we have with a very small budget. And laws and policies harvest protecting children and specific groups, implementation, enforcement on law, access to documentation to pre-registration. It's like, okay, where do we find this online? So we have a lack of structured, unified databases on these specific things, especially for protection. And I think data for protection in general, not only child protection, it's a lot of unstructured data. We have a lot of reports that people write. We have a lot of very important and detailed information over there, moreover than the indicators that we can have from the different questionnaires, et cetera, we can get. So we are using databases that contain some of this. And we went, for example, to the OHCHR and all the database where they have both NGOs and state party reports on the Children's Rights Conventions. And And then what we did over there, we used the NLP, natural language processing and machine learning, to parse and interpret these unstructured data to basically automatically identify some of the very important topics that child protection needed to take from those documents. And we basically enhance the accessibility of this data, because using this machine, what we can do is go to all of this amount of documents, make the machine read them, tag them, and then give us a very small summary that will tell us what all of those documents say and give us after the links of the documents. Okay. Then we had to develop a proof of concept to see if all of this works, because of course we were going to put in the same place automatically extraction and processing of the protection related data, embed all the various documents, and put also quantitative and qualitative information. Okay. So we are now having this prototype of a product where we have a dashboard, where we have data. For example, this is used from ACAPS, taking only the severity that we have for children. Then we have country profiles, general overviews, and then country profiles. So for the country profiles, we have, for example, a risk map, using part of the work that Anne-Marie is doing with Francesco on defining the risks. Then we are having a child protection summary that's basically a summary of all of those documents that we have over there, and then embedding also some of the indicators. For example, consequence for children child protection, our NIAP, we have that the mortality rates are important in order to see how are these consequences for child protection, and then we can also display them. But I'm going to show here a little bit more on how we can see that unstructured data, on how we can see all the data that is in documents. Or in this case, how are we showing, this is data from ACAPS that comes from these protection indicators, is it? The protection indicators from ACAPS.
Yeah.
Well, what we have there, it's not really indicated, we have raw data. This is where we have. So what we do here, we have by indicator, we have a main summary. This is all machine generated, okay? We have detailed summaries by indicators. So we can take the indicators, see what we have here in one small paragraph, and then basically have all the evidence and all the links to all the sources next to it, so that our protection coordinators, the child protection coordinators in this case, can go there and look into the data if that's what they want or need. This is using a little blurry here. I'm sorry. And then, sorry, we had to put also create a legal framework indicator. How do we find it? So we created within all of those documents. We thought, okay, looking into all of this information that we need to have, and looking of all of the things that child protection is interested in, we created several tags, and we said, is there a law or an action plan that I can take from what is written within the document that will tell me the existence of it or the non-existence of it, or I just have no idea, or I have no information about it. So we created this one so that we can have like a little bit of a kind of a visual cue to see where we are at. But then we do exactly the same. We have the detailed results by the country. We have, for example, what about the children maltreatment action plan? We have here what does the plan says, which articles in the law are actually mentioning it, which report it comes from, what date, and the people can also go and access directly the documents. And the coordinators, they already have an indicator and a summary of something that they will take probably 5 years in order to read all of the documents that are within that database. And this is only like a proof of concept for us that allows also for some promising initial results, that show the capability of technology to meet these complex data needs, and these complex data needs that are we see in protection over and over. We have also the ability to add structure and unstructured data in the same visual under the different pillars of an analysis framework to support a holistic analysis. And we provide coordinators with a powerful tool to quickly understand the situation, including the normative and relevant context for child protection in the countries of interest. And the challenges and limitations, first, the competing methodologies on data collection and the validity of data in different formats is definitely a challenge for us, because since we have to put everything in the same visual, it's rather difficult, especially with, say, like when the data is collected, if it's like monthly updated, if it's yearly updated, it has been only collected, I don't know, like 5 times, and then it stopped being collected. So that's why we had to get away like with a lot of data. We use, for example, we try to use the MSNA, but it's almost impossible to get them all together and to make sense of all of them for a whole project. So you have to be literally context by context and almost questioner by questioner in case you want to really have a holistic view of that data. So it is important to say that the data that we have here, we only are using available resources that are on the web that can be automatically collected and processed. We cannot use any other one. So this is a limitation, and we cannot don't display all the data. And it's very important because prioritization also means bias. So every time we're prioritizing, we have to have in mind that we are biased. This is not a full picture. We are adding bias to our information and to our products. So the future steps, we have the potential of using new technologies, especially natural language processing, to enhance data management and analysis within the sector, not only for child protection, but this extends to protection and to all of the other sectors that have data that is basically in an unstructured form. And I believe that for protection, like I know UNHCR has like tons of data that it's embedded in all of those databases that we call that are just basically like a library of documents over there that no one has gone through. But sometimes we go and Google it, and then we read this document and we read this document. But this helps us that. We support the areas where data is found in a structured form. We integrate different data sources in a visual for comparison in a very low-cost tool, because I think this is important. Normally what we are doing, I used to work also with the ICRC before, and we had like one project like this, and I don't know how many amount of money we had to put in order to create basically what they call like now the business intelligence, right? So you have all of these databases that can be seen in different by different people, which is true, to create this kind of dashboards. But now here we have a low-cost tool to do that, and of course we need to refine the tool to ensure it remains relevant and effective in the evolving needs. But this is, as I said, some efforts that the Child Protection AOR is doing with a very low budget. And these can be extended not only for child protection, but to any sector. Just we need to understand the needs. We have an analysis framework. We have some tags. Just go with it. And thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, that was so exciting to learn about. Oh my goodness. Yeah, I just, it was really inspiring to listen to and hear. So on my side here, I'm going to talk a little bit more on some of the recent developments within the GBV AOR in terms of moving us forward on defining GBV for better analysis. So in terms of GBV, often we have so many questions, right? Just like, how do we analyze the risks? Are women and girls feeling safe? What do we know about the quality of the services that are being provided? A number of questions, and it can be very overwhelming for coordinators and for any colleague working in protection in general. And it's really difficult to know where one starts. We, as of 2 months ago, sort of officially disseminated our GBV and emergencies analytical framework. And the goal is for the framework is to guide overall GBV data collection and analysis in humanitarian emergencies. It aims to assist practitioners in situating themselves within this overall information landscape with secondary data sources and informing potentially further primary data collection, and with, of course, the overarching goal of actually informing the prevention and response. In relationship to the framework, these are the overall key deliverables that came with it. It comes with a technical guidance note. There's the framework itself, as well as an Excel document that consolidates the framework along with the analytical elaborations of the analytical framework in terms of the definitions, and also linkages to key guiding questions and information needs that I'll elaborate on further. So here's the analytical framework itself. You'll see that we have divided it in 3 overarching domains. So there's first the context and gender dimensions, second, the underlying GBV risk factors, and then finally the patterns and trends of GBV. And then they go down further into subdomains, as you can see here for each section. I hope you can read it, and then finally into categories in and of themselves. So I won't list all of them out here for you, but I'll go into depth into what one of them in a bit. So the key features of the Excel document that I just mentioned is the guiding analytical questions, linking that to the suggested information needs, as well as the relevant assessment tools and data collection tools, and then also potentially other data sources as well. And in terms of putting the analytical framework in action, one of the main deliverables of this framework is the secondary data review that is produced and across the context where we're active in. And it also provides the basis for further GBV assessments, in particular safety audits, for example. The use of the analytical framework is to really provide that structure for GBV analysis and to actually inform coordination and programming. It also helps us in terms of identifying key information gaps and needs in order to ensure that we have a comprehensive portrait of what's going on in GBV in a given context. And it also helps us in terms of identifying the appropriate questions and collection and assessment methodology in a particular scenario. And then it keeps track as well of what data should be collected and how to transform this data as well into actionable analysis and information-driven outputs. And then finally, it also complements other efforts, for example, protection and intersectoral analysis, PAF, with more in-depth GBV analysis. So I'm going to dive just a little bit further into the underlying GBV risk factors for today's, for the purposes of today, and show you an excerpt from that Excel document I was just talking about. So for example, under the GBV risk factors, we have one subdomain, which is on GBV threats and vulnerabilities. And under this, we have one category, which is the populations at risk. So some of the guiding analytical questions that we're asking here is who or what population groups are more vulnerable during the crisis, and then to identify the specific groups that are or at increased risk of GBV and the reasons for why that is. The suggested information needs linked to then this research question. For example, information about the at-risk groups with an intersectional perspective. And there's we also provide little tips, for example, beginning with your traditional at-risk groups, or for example, ethnic minorities, female-headed households, this sort of thing, and then expand further and ensure that it's contextualized accordingly. And then, as you can see there, that's also the relevant data assessments or data collection as well that accompanies there. Here's another example, safety or risk perceptions. What are the safety concerns of affected populations, particularly women and girls, because as we know, they're disproportionately affected by GBV across contexts. What's the perceived level of safety in carrying out day-to-day activities? And you'll see this echoed later and when I talk a bit more about the protection risk in general. And then you can see here that in terms of the information needs, you can see here the list of locations where women and girls might be reporting higher levels of feelings of lack of safety, the list of day-to-day activities that are affected, et cetera, and again, the information sources that are there. So I want to circle back to a key reference point for us in terms of the analytical framework, which is the interaction GBV prevention evaluation framework and the risk equation there. So this is a key reference point for us in terms of thinking about and conceptualizing what GBV risk looks like and how do we analyze it in a given context. And it gets us closer to asking this question and trying to answer, how do we look at GBV risk concretely? So one of the challenges we've come across, especially in collaborating with Francesco with GPC in terms of defining the protection risk, is that there's a lot of lack of clarity around what GBV includes, right? As a standalone protection risk, and then also with its actual overlap into other protection risk. And I just threw up there the quote in terms of our definition that we actually put the presence of one or more of the other 14 protection risks and actually constitute a risk of GBV. So that can create analytical challenges, of course, when it comes to trying to deep dive into what GBV risk looks like in a given context. Then there's also there's a difficulty around promoting cohesive language around GBV with the other protection risks themselves because of those particular approaches that we use, for example, the survivor-centered approach, and just ensuring that there's alignment around that we're speaking the same language. So I'm throwing up here the severity scale that we've, in its current format, that we've agreed upon with GPC as it stands now. As you can see, that it goes from, the focus really is on the impacts on women and girls. We wanted to put that front and center in terms of their safety, their mobility, whether GBV is happening, and whether there are a lot of reports of GBV or if there's not, the state fulfillment of its obligations and also survivor rights as well. And I won't read through this whole thing. And so that, yeah, as I've said, those are the key dimensions right there. And I just wanted to speak more in terms of the lessons learned of the process of coming up with the severity criteria. I will say that the agreement on language is difficult. It's very, very challenging. The difference between, for example, what the word occurrence means for one person versus another person is very different versus reports for one person for another person. And so the agreement on language is extremely difficult and it's a long process of consultation. I will say that also that consensus building when it comes to deciding and conceptualizing these criteria does not equal unanimity, and that's okay. It says that we don't need to all agree in order to reach some sort of consensus on key definitions and criteria. But that does mean that we also need to make space and time for continual improvements and feedback in order to ensure that we are keeping it in order to make space for that as well. And I think that's something, at least in the process of working with Francesco on the protection risk, certainly I feel like, at least in our terms of our collaboration, we've definitely had space to do so on an ongoing basis and to revise as needed. So the next steps for us is to really try to flesh out, based on that, the PEF, the tools for the GBV risk analysis. So trying to build out different parts of that equation a bit more. And then linked to that as well, the development of a safety audit question bank as well. And that is linked into other larger streams of work as well. And I think. Thank you.
Like the panelists, I would like to thank the panelists on all these flows of concept that have been posing. Because from setting the stage level to then presenting some actual field operational challenges and concern. But then we have also been presented with different type of tools, innovation and machine learning, methodological framework on which these data collection process are then supposed to respond to, and some very solid reflection of what makes sense or what doesn't. I was informed that there are some very distinguished colleagues in the audience, so I would like really to open the floor for questions, reflections, and others. Please, thank you for breaking the ice. Please introduce yourself.
Yes. Yeah. First of all, thank you so much for this. Very interesting. My name is Tim. I work for Ground Truth Solutions. It's an organization that is trying to better understand community perception in the humanitarian sector. A lot of very interesting things have been said. I very much also like the last intervention, which explains how the other 14 protection risks also influence the GBV risk. And a lot of other things I could focus on, but because of lack of time, I would like to focus on the more critical elements that I have, if you don't mind. I think it's also more interesting. The Global Protection Review 2 years ago, I think, that came out. The key result was that efforts in implementing the centrality of protection are not resulting in the reduction of critical protection risks due to over-focus on process instead of programming. So I wonder, now we find ourselves here, and obviously the topic set pushes you to go into the direction and diving into different processes. So that totally makes sense. But I'm also wondering if there's anything in place to actually measure protection outcomes once you use all the tools that you're making, to see if actually what you're trying or what you're doing is leading to the reduction of risks. The second element I have, if I may, is, and maybe that is also linked to GTS core mission, which is starting from communities. In all the protection statements, in the policy that we have, in the commitments, it's all about starting from the perspective from communities. I didn't hear that word that often in the past 1 hour during that discussion. And so I wonder, you have all the different sources of information. You have DTM, you have protection incident monitoring from UNHCR, you have REACH. Do you have one source that actually starts, that looks, or that starts from the bottom up, that you're saying we need to become better at, and tries to understand how community understand protection without it being framed already from the top down, and understanding what you actually want from the humanitarians. And if humanitarians can't deliver it, where's a moment in the process that you describe where you also share information with other stakeholders? It might be a better place to support communities. My very last point, and then I stop, I promise. But it's linked to the bottom-up approach that you mentioned, Francesco. And I would be curious if you could actually answer this as well, because you worked before for WeWorld, and they were actually great in doing this community-driven approach, actually, where you've been awarded for this. At the same time, the introductory statement was more about, I'm trying to find it, starting from the usage, right? The decision that needs to be done. Isn't that a bit contradicting? You start from the top, what needs to be decided, at the same time you're calling for a bottom-up approach. How can you merge those things together? Thank you.
Maybe just to say, there are also some questions online. When
Are they?
are you taking a number of questions and then?
Yeah, I was planning so. You already 3 in one shot, but I have no access, unfortunately. Should I?
No, but Elvina can read them out for you if you want. Do you want to see the chat?
Yes, please. Meanwhile, any other questions? So much. Any other questions, please, guys?
Thank you. So my name is Sudeep. So I'm working for ACAF. So based in Amman for the new business, we are supporting the global cluster as well as the Yemen and other hubs in terms of providing supports on the protection risks analysis and other kind of support. So my question to one of the things is that using the NLP language to structure the data that are available in the market. So does that function also available for the other language? Because most of the reports that are produced are in the local language. For example, in the Middle East region, it's more in the Arabic. If you go to a country-specific language, so does that has capability, or you are planning to do that kind of capabilities in the futures? And another question is more, it's for all of us, because nowadays I see it's like more of like a data-rich environment. So many people are collecting data and producing data kind of thing. So, and we should also ask questions to ourselves whether do we really need those kind of data to the response? But do we really need those kind of sophisticated analytical frameworks to do a like better response in the decision-making process? So you have also mentioned that one. So yeah, it's not for all of us. That's question. So thanks.
Thank you very much. Then maybe the last two, no, three, and then we, yeah, please. Whatever. Okay.
Hello, my name is Marlies Pohl. I work for OCHA in New York around the protection of civilians issues. And I was just wondering how this helps to come together to inform the more strategic HCT decision-making, whether that's sort of promoting multi-sectoral responses or sort of feeding into HCT strategies as to what we really requires a collective response, and also, as I'm sitting in the secretariat and surrounded by the other pillars, how do we draw from other pillars? How do we help feed or steer other pillars and make those links sort of, including where the non-humanitarian response is really needed to step in and tackle things? Would be complementary.
Much.
I'm Miguel from OCHA as well.
Speak up. Everyone just supports, right? But you can.
Can you speak a little louder?
Okay, I'm Miguel from OCHA. So thank you for the sessions, and I really liked it, the opposite of the colleague, that every decision, every data gathering should start with a question for making a decision, right? It's like we don't have to jump to get the data, we have to know what we want to do with the data to ask the proper questions, right? So I really engage with that. But my question is about what do you think, because all the presentations, it seems to focus on sectoral assessment or multi-sectoral needs assessment. But what do you think about the assessment fatigue? We all know when you are in the field that all the program officers, they go to this community. Usually it's a nearby community as well because it's reachable, and they come with information, and there is no data. There is not even an action report many times. So people go to the same communities because they are easy to access, and they get this non-structured information, oral. They say in meetings or by asking, but there is no data about it. And usually the program and the response is also focused on these areas because it's the areas that they have visited. So there are some neglected areas that are difficult to reach. No one went there to ask. So what do you think of all of these? Usually, program managers visit these close to reach areas, and hard to reach areas that probably are more on need are super neglected. So what is your thought about that? And well, also, yeah, what would you think? Also, I'm a little controversial maybe, but I think we are living communities, right, ourselves. So you know how to know what are the challenges on your own community. So we are all data driven and super crazy about data and assessments and questions. So, but there is people in the communities that really knows what's going on. I don't know. So how do you think this mix of gathering reality from local sources versus data gets into it? Because I guess if a humanitarian or an enumerator lives in a community, the enumerator has much information that what they can gather from data. So how do you think these two things match? Thank you.
Please.
Hi, my name is Farah. I'm with the UK FCDA. I'm quite curious with the NLP project, if there's any kind of like weighting on the reports. So I noticed you're using UN reports and Amnesty International, and then kind of touching on one of the colleagues' question about localization, and maybe there's like a contention with having all the Western reports and not it being in the local languages. Yeah, how you guys see that moving forward with your tool pilot.
Get that? Amazing. So maybe we're gonna start with this round of questions. I have also a couple from online. Well, I think I'll start with you. And if you can just pass through some of the community level type of reflection, as well as any measure of protection outcomes as part of it.
How to condense in 2 minutes what should be a reflection of like several hours. Let's see if I can manage to make that. No, great question, great question. I mean, a bit of a ground that a colleague just mentioned. My experience comes from 10 years in community-based approach and doing joint protection analysis in communities. And then I moved to the global level. So just for sharing some of why I have certain reflections. One is related to the community engagement and everything. Our system are not based to fully allow community engagement. Let's speak it clearly. So our systems in general, the one we have naturally, are not built to actually enable community engagement as, I mean, community engagement, many definitions, I've seen many. Because in the past, we needed data, we needed PIC and so on, but you know, community engagement require investment and require collaboration beyond mandates. Those are the two preconditions, which we know that, so it's a very difficult process. That's one consideration. The other is that all the conceptualization and terminology we use, the community, they honestly don't care about that terminology. So we have to be concrete, to be understanding things and to convey strategic messages, because a person in New York has to understand things and see things with a certain language. So we have that language that is needed there, and then here we don't need language, we need engagement. So again, as my very beginning, it's complex. So starting from my previous 10 years of community-based approach that went through very well, I realized at a global level, we needed a couple of things on the protection universe. One is clarifying ourselves. We have a lot of terminology, a lot of that we use in different settings, because protection touches on so many things. Because there is the protection needs and protection response, there is the protection services, the protection environment, the strategy of protection. There is protection of civilians, which is different from centrality of protection. So we have been transforming those concepts, and we have been basically trickling down those concepts on the system we use to collect data. So I think that has been one of the biggest problems that we have had in the past. So what we're trying to do now, and maybe just linking again, just to answer quickly many things, with a question on assessment, just one clarification. One of the things we're trying to do is not to be based on assessments anymore. So the harmonization of information is to understand what information we need and to understand what information is. So if there is the misperception, that's what we're trying to do, because relying on assessment, it's not working. They're costly. And there is many of the information is already there. So we have been implementing, I mean, it's not that the panel discussed that, but how to capture the qualitative report from our frontline coordinators in the data. It's a problem, we have that information, but we don't use it. So, so it's not about assessment, it's about understanding what do we need to know and where is it. And also try to engage and connect the two universe, which are the IAM and the program, which is the other that we have separated. So these are general elements. And just to conclude with the centrality of protection, I don't think I spend time because you know where that pertains. But from our side, I've been following on protection risks, analysis of protection risk, which is in the benchmark, the cornerstone of protection. We were not able to be very effective in conveying those messages because we didn't have clarity on the language of risks. We are learning, as we're learning a lot. We had to have that clarity. We didn't have clarity on how to organize information in ways that can be conveyed, and we've been working on. So there has been a lot of building blocks to be able to convey those messages. So on our side, at least, I don't know, I think other colleagues want to intervene on the centrality of protection. What we are trying to do as a sector is to inform better because it's where our roles stand, it's where it's our role, but not just on the analytical outputs. It's also to understand what recommendations that are needed in order to achieve those outcomes. Oftentimes, we've been limited to the humanitarian realm because it's our bread and butter. What we're trying to do is like now understanding, okay, on the humanitarian side, we need this. But then there is also all the other set of things that are. So it's not a concrete response, but we have been really affecting how to present better and to make them more solid and present them better. And on outcome monitoring global, I mean, there's another conversation that maybe doesn't pertain only to protection, but it's also the nexus and so on. I don't know if we are there in any field to be able to, maybe it's not that.
Thank you. Very much. Any
Maybe
colleagues, Zali, that would like to provide some remarks?
Yeah, so yeah, I think the analytical framework from our side on GBV side can be overwhelming. It's not meant to be sort of done all at once. It's not, sometimes we wind up with secondary data reviews that can be like 50 to 100 pages even. And that's not necessarily the goal, is to produce these massive documents. The goal is to more provide sort of an overall blank map through which coordinators and IMs can sort of situate themselves in terms of information needs and connecting the dots and in terms of the sources. So I would just say that, and that's why probably it looks a bit overwhelming on first glance, because it's supposed to be a bit of the catch-all. In terms of community engagement, we know we need to do better on it. I think it's not, there's a number of initiatives that are already happening right now in order to increase community engagement in these different processes. So for example, on the risk side, IOM on the Safe from the Start has the Women's Participation Project that is really geared towards centering women and girls as the focus for gathering this information and for validating their experiences. In terms of we are also promoting as well focus group discussion uses to ensure that local communities are engaged in these processes. And as well, something that's really, we know that is lacking, for example, in the safety audit process, you'll have data collection done with community members. That data is then analyzed by somebody not from the community, and then those findings can be decontextualized and then fed into response plans. And so that's something that actually we're very cognizant of, and that currently we're engaging with other clusters in order to look at how we can improve the safety audit process in order to do analysis better for better outcomes in terms of the response, and ensure that those sort of really contextual, community-specific findings and meanings are not lost through the process of analysis, validation, and then translation into the putting into that response. And then I want to also refer to my colleague Astrid. Astrid, can you introduce yourself as well?
Yeah. I'm Astrid Holland. I'm the deputy of the GPAOR. I've been working closely with Emily. I just wanted to add, because I think you were talking earlier about how it's difficult to agree on concepts and how we integrate. And I think you're probably all aware, but I think it came to my mind with a question about measuring outcomes. Because with GBV, what is tricky, right, is that we can measure and we become much better at measuring the risks and measuring the results of our services and that they're delivered and who are reached and what are the needs. But it's very difficult in a humanitarian context to measure a reduce in occurrence of GBV, right? And part of why our data work is so complex is that we know that in contexts where there is no reporting of cases coming forward, it could be that the situation is even more dire in terms of there are no services, which is why we don't have the reporting. And in terms of it being such a taboo or locked up issue that no one is talking about it in the community. And part of what we're doing, which is what I think Emily explained really well, is we're then trying to bring in as much as we can local groups and focus group discussions. And we've had some work on that in Syria, for example, whole of Syria, where you really have
focus groups discussions that happen all across the country. And there you cannot measure a reduction of of human rights violations of sexual violence, for example, but we can see the trends of new types of risk, new occurrences that the communities are talking about and how they perceive the threats and the situation.
I will also add on that having community engagement in these processes has real implications in terms of disclosures, GBV disclosures, and also what we need to do in terms of psychological first aid when that happens. And so I think in terms of community engagement in these processes, it's so important, but the how of how we do it is also equally important to ensure safety and all around for everybody concerned. Yeah.
Thank you very much. So one point, you have a
Peter Kozolets, Global Protection Cluster Deputy Coordinator. Regarding the outcomes you mentioned before, at the level of Interagency Standing Committee, the Task Force 1 on the Centrality of Protection developed the aid memoir note on the centrality of protection, but also the note on measurement of the impact from the humanitarian counter teams. The document is not has not been finalized yet, but it should be happening very, very soon, and then it will be shared.
Yeah, and then I have a couple of Hi, I'm Shannon Hayes. I work for the Global Child Protection Cluster and also for IOM's DTM. And I just wanted to put these presentations in a bit of context, which I think might help with your questions on why are we starting from decisions? Why is it not more community oriented? And with the referral thing. Our panelists are from the global clusters, which means that they have a very specific purpose of strategic planning. So they need data that is collected all over a country, and they need to be able to decide who is affected, where are they, how are they affected, so that they can then coordinate all the partners to make sure that those needs are met all over the place. And so this is why at that level, at a needs assessment level for the humanitarian program cycle, it's not about communities coming up because we don't have the resources to go all over a country and talk to all of the communities. We don't have the time to do that. And so it's very much looking at where are the broader issues, and then the partners who are implementing in the field are the ones who are going to be working with the communities, working on those referral mechanisms, et cetera. So that's why we start with decisions, because I mean, protection is so complex. Like, can you explain it to your grandma with one sentence? It's not possible, right? There are so many different things that influence protection. And so by starting with decisions, it helps us to hone in the data that we're going to collect. So we're not over collecting a whole bunch of data. We just need just enough information in order to make decisions that will lead to action.
Thank you, Shannon. That was very to the point. Maybe in order to add other groups.
Oh, just to say that I think the most difficult thing we face in these 7 years is to have be able to identify the decisions. And I think this model that we have presented works also when you work with communities. It's the decision that needs to be defined with the community. So it's the response agent or the agency that needs to identify what are the decisions that need to be made, and we need to do that with the community. And then the process continues as we have presented it. But it's at the beginning of the process that you need that engagement.
Thank you. Onward.
Yeah, because just to complement what you say, there are also two levels. We have to nuance what a decision is. What we were discussing today, we have a much more structural level that we have to understand what we need to understand. And we were not clear. So, and that's the first, we can call it a decision, but we have to understand the categorization we're doing as on is the first trickling down, because the landscape of information of protection was firstly much more related to the use of it and the immediate, but not common goal. And then there is the second level that can help us out in understanding, okay, of that, we have to understand these 15 things, 16 things going down. Then according to the decision you have to do on the ground, then you can pick and choose the type of information you need. Because if you have a program decision, there is a specific information you need. If you have a strategic, it's different. So yeah, just to say that it's all across the process. So there's a decision on the field, but then a decision as a sector, and both things go together. So
Thank you very much. Online, they were asking if the NIAP platform presented was available or accessible online. I just explained it's a prototype and very soon.
Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna answer then the questions, all the like
sorry,
questions. It's okay. The 3 questions around the platform. Yeah, indeed, like the models, the best performing models right now are in English, but the documents that we support, they're not necessarily all in English. So we have like all of these different translation tools that we can actually use in order to do that. And currently we're using also OpenAI as in order to help us do the processing. So basically, if you can translate that they support 85 languages, then there's have like documents regardless, doesn't matter, and then you put them back. So it means that our models are in English, and that's why we're producing these things in English. And yeah, if any like very much like other technical questions, we can totally we can totally talk about that afterwards. And then there's also like Celine over there that can be, a little bit more into the nitty-gritty on the whole system and all the NLP part. And regarding the question of the documents that we are using, as I said before, we look into these OCHR treaty database where we have all the state party reports and the NGO reports to the Child Rights Convention. So we took them all from all the things. So it means that everything that they have been reporting, and some of the reports are in English, some of the reports are in French, some of the reports are in Spanish or whatever. And this is what we process under the different tags that we created specifically for the child protection AOR. And for the availability of the platform, the idea is that the child protection AOR is going to put it available for everyone. But until like the project is done, like as I said, now we are going little by little, and now we're giving you like what we have so far. But I think now we can, and if you want to see like a little bit of it, we can, like either Celine or me, we can show it to you a little bit. It's like running locally, so basically we can only run it on our computers. And we're developing the architecture so that we can have it available for online, but it will be not until September, I guess, when we
to go to the panelists in the interest, we unfortunately have to close the discussion, which I have to say was very, very. And would you have any other remarks or points?
I don't think anything directly to the questions.
One last question received online, super quick, about response. If since all this work that has been done in terms of harmonized framework, standard tools, and methodology, if there was any learning in terms of the response, because of very vague.
No, it's very vague, but maybe just a quick answer, because we're also looking at the response together, harmonization of that. The first learning is that these initial exercises we're doing, these initial efforts are fundamental for us to understand how the response is contributing to achieve outcomes. So that will be my answer. At the moment, it's been quite difficult because you have so many countries, so many operations, so many types of responses that first of all, on outcome, it's impossible, and I want to put it on the table, to do attribution. So we'll never be able to say this activity managed to reduce that, but we can contribution. A way of music contribution from our side is first to organize this that you have seen together collectively, and that will help us out in understanding better and move to see how different action can contribute. But still, you don't have parameters on the analytical output that are similar. It's impossible to measure response. So the lessons learned is that we have to do this exercise, and then we can move through this.
I'd like to sincerely thank you all, the panelists, for their presentation. As you said it very well in the opening, for the beginning of your presentation, that is complex, but not complex. I think that all the various tools, framework, platform, as well as reflection, were able to demonstrate how advanced by now the level of understanding, operationalization, and coordination is on this. I know very well that discussion in a conference room and application in the field. There are lots of many things in the middle. So I know that it's an open discussion in a way that can settle. Thanks again. And it was very interesting. Other colleagues aligned to us.
Thank you.
It's like higher all fast.
Yeah. Yeah, how are you doing?
No, I went to the hospital.